Saban Brans.
Hey YouTube, Awesome Rider here. In today's video, I'm going to be talking about kind of a what-if scenario, imagining an alternate reality in which Neo Saban still owned Power Rangers, and what that would look like, comparing it a little bit to what we have now with this kind of coma we're in with the franchise as a result of Hasbro's decisions. I've gotten the suggestion a couple times and I thought it would be fun. I'm going to do one for this, and I'm going to do one for Disney. I don't think I would do Saban Entertainment just because that'd be a little bit weird and involves a lot more corporate stuff, and this is basically the same thing. So, what if Neo Saban and Saban Brans, whatever, had never sold the rights to Hasbro? What would it look like? And again, this is sheer speculation. Obviously, no one can say with 100% certainty what would have happened. It's just kind of speculating based on what we already got and where they were going. So, Neo Saban's sort of mode of operation was the show being, the 2 seasons, the main season, the super season, and kind of dialing it back to that mmpr level of maturity. And we all know what the Neo Saban formula was. And then they also had some greater ambitions for the movie, which didn't do as well as they thought. So presuming, we're at Super Ninja Steel, where do we go next? I think Beast Morphers was in development, early development, before the brand was sold. So I think that would have stayed. I think we would have gotten Beast Morphers. I think that there's a good chance PR would still be happening right now in that form, at least some version of that form. As far as the movie goes, I think that it likely would have been dormant. I do think that there's maybe a 10% chance they could have pulled things together to get one more sequel, because it didn't do so well, but I don't think it completely devastatingly tanked from what I remember. And I remember hearing that there was even some interest early on when Hasbro bought it of maybe trying to salvage it, or there were some people that thought it was possible, meaning that there was some small interest. And I think that it would have been highly unlikely, but I think there maybe would have been a chance they could have pulled together a sequel that probably would have been pretty good. I think it would have been one that maybe had some of the fan complaints that people are like, this has too much depth, I just want shallow action. It maybe would have had more action, and it would have been a little bit better received by some of the hardcore complainers, but then it probably wouldn't have gone any further. I guess the point is, I think if anything was done with the movie, I would say a 5% chance we would have gotten one more, but I don't think we would have gotten further than that. Apparently they had plans for 5 or 6 movies or something crazy like that. That's another thing I would love to see. I mentioned in a previous video this last week how I would love to know what the Entwistle plans looked like, because you know that there was at least some sort of outline, and sitting somewhere is probably at least a general list of some rough ideas for what the sequel would have looked like, what the long-term plans were like. It's possible they didn't know what movie 5 looked like, but you know that somebody had some ideas at some point, and I would love to know those someday. But as far as the movie goes, I think the chances would have been slim, but I think that there would have been a greater chance than Hasbro picking up the 2017 movie. But again, as far as the show, I think we would have continued maybe till now, or at least for a great bit longer, with the 2 season setup and all that. I hope that they would drop the super naming convention. I was never as bothered as most people by the structure, because it was a little bit weird in some ways, but it was also just closer to the way modern TV went. It feels like with a lot of practices that we deal with now with PR in the last few years, we're coming up against things just operating more like other things that are normal, and it seems weird to the Power Rangers fan base because apparently that's the only thing they watch. But anyway, I think it would have continued. I'm not sure where it would have gone. I'm not sure how long they would have stayed at Nickelodeon. Would they have moved to streaming? Is it possible they would have moved to Paramount Plus, which I believe is the streaming service that Nickelodeon is tied to? I think that would have been a possibility. I think it would have stayed on Nickelodeon and then maybe moved to Paramount Plus, or done a thing where it's on both. There were some shows, I'm not following Paramount Plus religiously, but I know that some of their shows would later air on network TV. I think Camp Coral and the animated Rugrats reboot were exclusives, but then I've seen them on the TV guide. So I think maybe it would have been something like that, where it could have moved over as an exclusive or done simultaneous airing or something like that. But also they did obviously have a deal with Netflix before Hasbro bought it. We had all the past seasons on there, and they were the exclusive home for streaming for that. So it's also possible they would have also moved to Netflix. I'm only curious about that because we just learned about how Netflix walked away from Hasbro because they were promised the reboot, and then they delivered classic seasons and they didn't want that. However, I think that it's possible if they were with Netflix with Saban, it would have been a different situation, because I don't necessarily think Saban, at least as far as we knew based on their plans, would have pitched a reboot show. They likely would have just pitched, hey, what if we gave you the exclusive rights to air the newest seasons of PR, and, bolster your kids' content. So I think that would have been possible, because if there was never a discussion or a promise of a reboot show that was never delivered, I could have seen, you know, the next adaptions for Beast Morphers, Dino Fury, whatever would have happened being on Netflix. And I think there's a good chance that would have continued, because the thing about PR is it's kind of like in a coma right now, but it was a really good franchise at just being on life support. It like never made any waves at all, didn't even make any blips, it just kind of existed in the background. In a way, it's kind of like that character who, even though I've seen this movie a bajillion times, I don't remember his name, but the stapler character from Office Space. It just kind of slipped through the cracks. Well, it just kind of slipped through the cracks and kept existing. It kind of sustained itself with its formula and its toys that did decently enough to just keep existing. So I think that there's a very good chance it would still be happening, or at least would have happened for a good long time. Now, is this better or worse than what we have now? I think most people would agree it's better, because we would at least be getting something. I'll be honest, like, I'm not desperate for that timeline. Like, if you were to give me a timeline where we got a final season of Legends of Tomorrow and Superman and Lois was allowed to still exist, and I would have wanted to see that Green Arrow in the Canary series, I thought that was cool, I would jump there immediately. But I wouldn't be itching to jump to the timeline where we got Neo Saban. It's pretty bad right now, but if there's like a 1% chance of a cool reimagining, I would kind of take that over Neo Saban Purgatory personally. Not that I'm saying now is better, but I'm just saying there are some shows and movies that were canceled that I would absolutely travel to the timeline where they exist in a heartbeat. But with this, I'm like, maybe I'll go later. However, I do think there would have been probably some larger positives about it. I think in general, if this would have existed, now people are already romanticizing the Neo Saban era, but people would still be complaining about the quality of it, I'm sure. I feel like no matter what, you're gonna have people complaining. It feels like nowadays fans just set up side on the opposite camp of whatever's happening just to argue. It's like with Star Wars. It's like, for years, people told George Lucas, the man who invented Star Wars, that he didn't understand Star Wars. And then as soon as he sold it, they're like, he was our hero. And then you got like, oh, they need to have Dave Filoni in charge. As soon as he's in charge of stuff, he doesn't understand it. Just, God, a bunch of goons. Anyway, sorry, side tangent. Point is, I feel like we would still have probably the hardcore fandom complaining about the level of quality and maturity the show was at. However, it would have brought in some new fans. As we've seen, especially over the last few years, there was some chunks of people that grew up with Samurai, with Megaforce, with Dino Charge, that were brought in, checked out the other series, remember those fondly. So that would have been a positive, as we would have gotten new fans with younger generations growing up with Beast Morphers, Dino Fury, you know, Loop Pad adaptation, probably not because of the reasons they gave. You know what I mean? Whatever the next adaptation was, we would have gotten a steady cycle of smaller but new fans. I mean, smaller literally because they're kids, but I mean like they're not making waves over here. And I do think a bonus probably would have been, we would for sure see the Boom comics continue, because that seemed to be something they were invested in. As of this moment, we know that the main series is ending under Hasbro, but Boom has also said there's announcements coming. So at the moment, it doesn't seem like the comics are fully dying, but I think that we would have just had a more certain future with the comics, and I do think there would have been more opportunity for stuff like Hyperforce Season 2 and stuff like that. Because Saban did, even though they made some very poor decisions, and I wasn't the biggest fan of a lot of the stuff they did definitely care, or at least care about making money from it in a more passionate way. So I think we would have probably been in for the same purgatory for the show, but I think there would have been opportunities for more bonus stuff like the comics and Hyperforce, and I think that would have been nice. It's definitely interesting to think about, as I'm really curious what that timeline looks like. But what do you guys think? If Neo Saban would have held on to it, do you think we'd be better off? What do you think would have happened for the show, for the movie, for the comics, any other bonus content? Let me know as always. Until next time, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and climb the steps and ring that bell to get notifications for my videos. Dawson Ryder, signing out.